Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with Taylor from Life Goals Investments. And if you watched episode 1, we closed with a cliffhanger. Why don't you go ahead, Taylor, and tease them with how we're going to start episode 2?
This is my question to you, so I'm going to throw it back at you. I'll take a swing if you want, but I will let you answer first. So I said, what happens? We just came off of Q1 showing a negative GDP print, which is the economic report card. If you get 2 negative GDP prints in a row, that's a recession. The Fed is obviously raising rates right now to curb this ridiculously obnoxious inflation that we're in. So inflation's still here. What happens? What does the Fed do if next quarter the GDP print shows negative?
So a couple of things. So I've dug into the number because it was so shocking. It was very much an accounting 101 issue. I see less than a 5% chance we get a repeat of a shocking negative number. So a recession by the classic metric will be not occurred. But I think the question is worth talking about because it was such a shock. It is, well, first off, the Fed's not going to slow down, especially if the internals say the consumer is still spending. We had record imports in Q1. That stuff goes somewhere, and it means the consumer is spending. I, as you know, believe the consumer is not nearly as weak, and I actually think the consumer is getting weaker week by week. Consumers are now saying, can I live without it? They're not sacrificing to save money. They're deciding, do I buy this or do I buy that? Because I've only got $1 or 100 or whatever. So I think we are in for a bad mix. I think again, I go back to my whiteboard discussion of 2022 and 2023. Nothing has maybe changed my mind. This year will go down as stagflation. High inflation, below trend growth. And historically speaking, below trend growth has been, sub 2%, sub 1. I'm going to call it stagflation, even if we have 2 negative GDPs and we still have 5, 6, 7, 8% inflation. We are in stagflation. We have too much money chasing too few goods, and it needs to stop. I think the Fed, I think Powell said it Thursday, or was it 2 Thursdays ago? I don't care about the stock market. He didn't say that exactly, but he basically said,
no, he did. You're right.
Yeah. He said, I don't care. I don't care. He's basically like, not my problem. I've got to fix gas and food and, rent and all these other things because we're losing the bottom tier of our, our economy. And I think he's right. It's crazy, Taylor. So I'm a landlord. I got lots of units, and I've had more tenants ask for help in the last 60 days than I had during the depth of the pandemic. That's not a good sign.
That's not a good sign. That's telling. Wow. That's the first you've mentioned that. That's shocking to me.
Yeah, it is not good what is going on at that rung. And again, it's a problem. It's happening everywhere. I talk to landlords. I communicate with landlords on my channel. A lot of people, right? Another guy on the East Coast, nearly 200 units. He's like, I don't know what happened in the last 30 days, but I had 5 requests for help. And he had 5 requests the whole year of 2020, right?
Ouch.
So inflation is really biting. So the short answer is, let's assume it's another negative print. It does not give the permission for the Fed to stop. It doesn't. I know everybody wants it, but it ain't coming.
Yeah. So I'll say this. I'm actually thinking that we've hit peak inflation. So I do think peak inflation has been touched and it's going to roll back over. But I saw some shocking stats this weekend as to how much, well, let me just walk you through them. So the Case-Shiller index is the way that, obviously the housing market is measured. So the Case-Shiller index was up 20.2%, which means the average house in the US is up 20.2% year over year for the month of February. That's higher than the 19.2% that they saw in January. Yes. So it doesn't seem that the housing market is slowing down. And the scary part about that is that rents, and you might be able to speak to this firsthand, but the article read that rents generally trail housing prices by 12 to 18 months. And so if home prices are still going up, that's going to trickle down a year later into rentals. And shelter is one third of CPI. And core CPI, when they strip out 2 other pieces, it becomes 40%.
Yeah.
And so inflation and shelter is a big piece of that inflation that's going to drive numbers here. So go ahead. I want to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So first off, CPI, that's the number we're talking about rolling over. I think you're right. 8.5 will be the high print of this cycle. But that's only because of how the math works, right? Our base effect, right? We're basically rolling off the last low month, inserting a higher month. So it's not right. We're going to go from 8.5 to 7.8, 7.9, 8. It still sucks.
It still sucks.
It still sucks.
It still sucks. We still feel for everybody, including ourselves. We don't like it ourselves, right?
Dude, when my wife, Olivia, actually comments on a receipt that's like, that costs what? Let me just tell you.
Hold on.
Inflation is real.
There's a problem.
She hasn't looked at a price tag in a decade. You know, Jesus. Yeah. So anyways, so the other thing is I have corrected CPI the last 6 months or so because it's an error in judgment, right? They use owner's equivalent rent, as you know, in CPI, which is a stupid survey of 100 owners on what you would rent for. So again, it's a really easy fix. I have stripped, because again, it's a formula, right? You strip out the 33%, which they say, I think last reading, owner's equivalent rent was like 5%. So you strip that out, and then you go back to Case Shiller, or you go back to Property Radar or any of these others, and you hear rents 14.1. You insert that. Our last CPI reading wasn't 8.5, it was 11.2.
Ouch. Don't do it to us, Michael.
11.2.
You just tell us the facts. That's brutal.
11.2. So yeah, have fun with that. So inflation is a problem.
So I'll say this too. So when talking about just going back to that original question of what does the Fed do, I actually have a different take on that, because I think that if you have GDP go negative again, which again, we're putting low probability.
Yeah.
I have a higher probability than you do. You have 5%. I have more like 10 to 12, somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah. But if that takes place, I don't think the Fed can move. The Fed's stuck.
Totally disagree.
So what I'm saying is that, and what I've been saying this entire time is that the Fed is not going to be able to be as aggressive as you think they are, because I think they're going to break the economy quicker. And now, granted, I don't anticipate.
Yeah. So hold on. Where in the Fed's charter does GDP show up? Isn't it stable prices and full employment? I don't remember where GDP was in there.
Yes, but draw a line that isn't a straight line between full employment and GDP. I think that's a tough thing to not draw a direct line between.
We're at 3.6%, and I'm going to guess go lower on Friday. Not happening.
Okay. Then productivity is really, really, really good. If unemployment continues to come down and GDP continues to be negative, people are incredibly, incredibly productive, more productive than they have ever been in the history of the country, which could be, but I get what you're saying there. It's a second derivative of it.
Yes,
but it's right there.
I would. I mean, it would certainly not be a fun. I mean, I don't want to be in the Fed today. Being a Fed member in an environment where you've had 2 statistical quarters of negative GDP and you have 7% CPI, I wouldn't want that job. It wouldn't be an easy call.
Like it cannot happen, right? It seems like it can't happen with unemployment where it is. So what happened that caused the imports to be so high that won't happen again likely is the fact that inventory needed to be built out. So inventory and bottlenecks are what caused the import number to be so high, because companies had to build out their inventory, which had been depleted due to all the bottlenecks of COVID. Correct. Now that's been chewed through. So that accounting error, accounting, whatever you want to call it, is not going to be an excuse to be around next time. And it won't be the same. So we'll see how it plays out. But the export side of things is concerning as well, because that's showing slowing global growth.
Well, dude, we're going to have a worldwide recession. We're going to have a worldwide
IMF just cut their GDP projections for the year. They cut them by more than 0.5%. And it's like, okay, we'll see. This economic stew is churning right now.
Yeah. So to wrap up episode 2, I don't think, again, I give it a 1 in 20, which is 5% chance that we have a negative. Because again, I think the one-off oddities that made up the negative number, wow, legit, is likely not going to repeat.
Fair.
And even if it did happen, I don't think the Fed has a choice. When they look at 1A and 1B, I don't think it really says negative GDP is a problem, right? And again, dude, they're at a quarter. By next week, they'll be at 75 basis points. What the hell are you going to do?
They're at, they're at, what are they at now? They're at, so it's 0 to 25. Now it's 25 to 50. Right. So next week they'll be at, another 50 basis points higher.
Yeah. It's just not going to happen. Well, this is a lot of fun.
But let me just say one thing in my defense of you, of that thought is that we have 2 to 3 meetings between now and when that next.
Oh, that's very true.
Will
very
be out.
true. Yeah,
so it'll be 150 basis points higher because it'll be likely 3 50 basis point moves from there. So then all of a sudden you're at 175 to 2.
That's fair.
But if you remember, actually, now we cycle back to our original conversations, that's about where I said they would be at the end of the year. I thought it would be multiple more 25 basis point moves, and they would get on their horse a little sooner than they did, but they waited, and now it's got to be 50s to get us there.
50s, yeah. Yeah, you called for 2, I called for 3. So
and you look to be actually smack dab directly in the middle of what the market expectations are at this point.
Yeah. And I called it weeks ago. I'm just
saying. You called it way before that bounce. You're right. Full credit. You called it when it was probably more like 2.5 or something like that.
2.5. Yeah. So this is a lot of fun.
Nicely done.
Yes. Well, I'll take the win now because it may go away soon.
We'll see.
Oh, Taylor, how can people find you?
Yep. Follow us at Life Goal on Instagram. Again, I'm sorry, at Life Goal Investments on Instagram, at Life Goal Investments.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael.
Uh-huh.